Hi guys, I Aziz welcome you to CoedMaster. So guys, call and apply functions are the most commonly used function in JavaScript. And if you want to master JavaScript, it is really crucial to learn about call and apply function. In this video, I am going to talk about call and apply function. So we will start by looking at the purpose of call function and what problem it solves. Then we will learn how the call function internally works. And in the last, we are going to implement the call and apply function from scratch. So I highly recommend to watch this video till the end in order to become better at JavaScript. So without wasting any time, let's get started. Alright guys, so before I speak anything about call and apply, first we need to understand how this binding actually works in JavaScript. So let's understand with a simple example. So let's declare an object with the name person and let's define one property on this object, and the name of this property is first name and the value is John. Now let's define another property. It is going to be a function with the name greet, and the purpose of this function is to greet this person. And this function is going to be accept an argument, and the name of that argument is last name. Great. Now let's use console.clear to clear the previous logs, and then again call console.log to log the greeting. And the greeting says hello, good morning, the first name, this dot first name and space, and then we will print the last name. Great. Now let's call this function using the person object. So let's write person dot greet bracket and save the file. Now you can see that we are able to see the log on the console which says hello, good morning, John undefined. So we can fix the undefined by passing the last value in this function, and the last value is going to be John and the second is the Smith. Let's save the file and you can see that the output on the console which says hello, good morning, John Smith. Great. So far so good. So we are able to log the greetings on the console, but still we don't know how this actually works internally, right? We don't know how the value of this is computed at runtime and how actually this binding works. Now let's understand how it works. So when we run this script, the JavaScript engine is going to figure out two things. Number one thing is where this function is being called, and the second thing is how this function is being called. So where this function is being called? This function is being called from app.js, right? And how this function is being called? We have called this function using the person object, right? So this object is going to be the containing object, right? Containing object, or we can say that this is a enclosing object, right? We can say it is a containing object or an enclosing object. So in this scenario, the JavaScript engine determines the value of this, and it's gonna point the value of this to the person object, which is why when we call this dot first name, it's gonna take first name from the person object, and we are able to see the output on the console as expected. So this is how it works internally. So far so great. So here we need to understand one very important thing, that when we call any function using the containing or enclosing object, then JavaScript engine uses the implicit binding. So which type of binding? Let me write it down. Which binding is used here? Implicit binding, where the value of these is dynamically bind to the person object. So far so good. Now let's do another thing. Let's move this function out of this object. Okay, so let's comment this out, let's comment this out, let's move this function out of this object. The name of function will remain the same. It's a greet only. And now let's try to call this greet function, okay, without the enclosing object. So let's call greet over here and save the file. Now you will see that we are getting undefined and defined. So we can fix the last name by passing the last name in this function and save the file. Now you can see that we got the last name, but still we are not getting the first name. Now we have to figure out why we are not getting the first name. So let's understand this. So again, if this scripts run, our JavaScript engine finds out where this function is being called and how this function is being called. So again, in this case, we are calling this function from app.js, and how we are calling this function? We are this time not using any enclosing or containing object. Rather than we are calling this function directly from app.js. So in this case, if this is a scenario, the JavaScript runtime decides what needs to be bind to this value, okay, and it figures out that this time the value of these must be bind to global this, okay. So it's gonna bind the value of this to global this, right? So this type of binding is called the default binding, okay. Which binding is this? Default binding, where the value of this is bind to the global this. Now you might be running this script on browser or on Node.js. So global this is a variable which hides all the abstraction. So if you run this script on the browser, it's gonna point to window object. If you run this script on Node.js, it's gonna point to global object. So far so clear. So we understood that in this script that this will be bind to the global this, and we don't have any identifier added to the global this. That's why we are getting the value of first name as undefined. So let's add the first name property on global dot this object, okay. So this is going to be global this dot first name, and the value of first name is going to be John. Let's save the file, and you will see that the problem is fixed now, and you can see the hello good morning John Smith. So far so great, and we got the output as expected. So somehow we are able to fix the problem of this binding. But this is not the perfect way to solve this problem, right? We need another solution, a solid or concrete solution to fix this problem. But we need to be sure first that we properly understood the two types of binding. One is the implicit binding, which means when we call a function using the enclosing object, then the JavaScript engine kicks in the implicit binding, okay. And when we run this function outside of the containing object, then the implicit binding kicks in. So I hope both the concepts are clear to you. So how we are going to fix this problem, and who is going to save us from this grief? So here comes the call and apply function for our rescue. Let's see how we can fix this problem using call and apply function, okay. So let's comment this out, or let's remove this piece of code. Now we are going to call this function using the call function. So let's write greet dot call, and in this call we are going to pass the context, and the context is going to be the person object, and the argument, the last name, is going to be Smith, okay. Now let's save the file, and you can see that again we got the same output, hello good morning John Smith. So this time we are not attaching, or we are not adding any attribute to global this object. So without adding any property to global this object, we are able to fix the problem of this binding. But the question over here is what this call function is doing internally, so that we are able to fix the problem with the this value binding, right? We need to figure it out. Okay, let's figure it out how this call function internally works. So let's remove this piece of code from here, Let's clean the file a little bit. Okay. Now we know two things, that there are two types of binding. One is the implicit binding and one is the default binding. So if this function exists inside the containing object, this value is bind to the containing object. We know this, right? So what happens if we move this function inside the person object and then we execute this function and again remove this function out of this person object? Can we do this? So the answer is absolutely yes. So call function basically leverage the implicit binding. So what it does basically, it's gonna take this person object and then it's gonna take this function. So temporarily it's going to move this function from here to inside the containing object. Then it's going to call this function so that the implicit binding kicks in, and then it's going to remove this function out of the containing object and it returns the result. This is what the call function does internally. Great, so far so clear. Now it's time to implement the call function from scratch, and let's see how we can accomplish this. Okay, before we write call function, let's go to the MDN documentation and see the signature of call function. So here we will find the call function in function.prototype.call property. Okay, and what is the syntax of this? The call function is accepting this argument and remaining arguments, and these arguments could be of n numbers, right? So we can pass n number of arguments into this call function. Okay, so let's copy function.prototype.call, paste it here. Now let's copy the signature or syntax of this call method, this one. Okay, so it's going to be the function, and this function is going to accept two arguments. One is this argument and the another is the arguments. So we can use the rest operator over here, so we can pass n number of arguments to this function. So far so great. Now let's implement this call function from scratch. So first we are going to check the value of this argument. So if this argument is valid, then okay, otherwise we are going to assign the global this to this argument. Clear. Now let's store the function in the fn variable. So what is the function? So we are calling the call on greet function. So this inside, so this keyword or this identifier inside the call function represents the greet function. Okay, so let's store this function using so let's store the greet function in a function variable. So let me write the comment that this is representing the greet function over here. So far so great. Now we want to move this function fn, which is referencing the greet function, inside the person object. And what is the person object? Person object is nothing but it is this argument, right? But we cannot directly add the greet function inside this argument. Why is it so? Because maybe possible that with the same key with the function name is already present in the object, and it's gonna create a conflict for us. So we need some other mechanism so that it will not disturb the other code, or it will not disturb the other properties. So here comes the symbol for our rescue, which gives us a unique ID which we can use to attach this function inside this object. So let's create one unique ID using a symbol. Let's call symbol and give it a label. So let's use any simple label like fn. Okay, so now we have this unique ID. Now we are going to use this argument. And what is this argument? Let me write down in comments that this argument is simply representing the person object. Okay, this way it will be easy for you to understand. Now this argument is representing the person object. We are going to add the function inside this person object. by using the computed property. Okay, and computed property is a unique ID which is created by symbol function. Okay, so it is unique in your entire program, which is guaranteed by the JavaScript runtime or JavaScript engine. And let's put function in this property. Okay, so it would something look like this, that you have a function over here with some property, and the name of property is unique ID, and you have a function like this. Okay, so it would look something like this. Okay, so that it will not disturb the other properties and it will not create any conflict in our code. Great. Okay, now we are going to call this function and then store the return value in a result variable. Okay, so now how we are going to call this function? Let's pull the function out of this object and then call this function by passing the arguments like this, arg. Okay, so this time we are using a spread operator to spread all the variables, all the arguments to this function. Okay, and then we are going to return the result. Okay, but we forget one thing, that we have attached this function to this object. It is our duty to clean up this function from this object. So to do this, we are going to use the delete operator to delete this function from person object. Great. So this is going to be the final implementation of our call function. So let me explain once again. First we are checking this argument. If we pass this argument as null, then it's gonna pointing to global object or global this. Okay, and this argument is nothing but a person object. Then we are storing the value of this to function variable, and this is nothing but it's a greet function. Great. Then we are creating a unique identifier to store the function inside the person object using the symbol function. Then we are calling the function, and this time it's gonna internally use the implicit binding because now this function resides in the person object. Okay, and using the implicit binding, that this value is going to be pointed to the person object. Okay, then we are getting the return value of calling this function and storing it in a result. Then we are deleting the function using the same unique ID from the person object, and then we are returning the value of this function call. So far so great. Now instead of using the default call function, we have replaced the default call function with our function. So which is why we are able to call this function. Okay, now if we call greet.call and then passing this argument as a person object and then the last name, let's save the file and see the output. Now you can see that we are still able to see the same output as expected. So far so great. I hope you understood the implementation of call function. It is very straightforward, no doubt. Now one thing is remaining, that we also want to implement the apply function from scratch. So call and the apply function is exactly same function with the small changes. And what are the changes? Let's see in the documentation. So if you see the syntax of call function, it is accepting this argument and the number of arguments and number of arguments. But if you look at the implementation of apply function, you will see that apply function accepts two arguments. One is this argument, and the second argument is the array. So the only difference is the call function is accepting the variable arguments, which is a comma separated arguments, but on the other hand, the apply function accepts the argument in the form of array. So let's copy this function from here. Let's write over here. Let's copy the exact same thing. And now we are going to implement the apply function. Let's replace apply with the function, and this time we have this argument and the array of argument. Let's copy the entire thing from here. Okay, so far so great. So here we just need to validate arguments array. So how we are going to validate this? So let's see it. So we can use the array.isArray function to check if arguments array is in the form of array or not. If it is in a form of array, then it's okay. If it is not, then we are going to pass the empty array to this function. Okay, so now instead of passing arguments to this function, we are going to pass the arguments array. So far so great. So this is the final implementation of apply function. Now instead of using the call function, let's use the apply function in place of call function. So let's copy apply greet.apply by passing the context, which is this argument, and then the second argument is going to be the array of values. So instead of passing comma separated values in apply function, we are passing the array of values. Let's save the file and you can see the exact same output as before. So if you observe carefully, there is only one difference between call and apply function. Okay, in call we can pass the comma separated values. On the other hand, in apply function we can pass the values as an array. So far so good. So this is pretty much all about call and apply function. Alright guys, this is all from my side for this video. If you learned something valuable from this video, then please hit the like button in order to make YouTube algorithm happy. Please subscribe to this channel and don't forget to click the bell icon so my friend you never miss any upcoming videos. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.